Well, good morning. It's great to be with you here again this morning as the props get rolled out. We are in the midst of our Colors of Christmas series, and today I've chosen the color blue. Maybe you got an email reminding you or inviting you to wear blue today. I had to resist the temptation to make a reference to or to sing Elvis Presley's Blue Christmas. Although if you check out our Instagram page, I did include it in our note today. But I wanted to talk about blue as a color of Christmas because of its deep significance in the Bible. Join with me in Exodus 24 to look at that. Exodus chapter 24 in verses 9 and 10. In this passage, Moses and his companions are having a vision of God. It's a significant moment in the story. Look at Exodus 24, verse 9. Moses and Aaron, Nadab and Abihu, and the 70 elders of Israel went up and saw the God of Israel. Under his feet was something like a pavement made of lapis lazuli, as bright blue as the sky. This is the vision. They are seeing the throne room of God. And the floor is bright blue. Lapis lazuli is a precious stone, a blue stone. And it's as blue, they say, as the sky. And so it gives us this image that the floor of heaven is the ceiling of earth, that we are looking up to see the floor of the throne room of heaven. And so, very early on in the Bible, blue takes on this significance related to the presence of God. Again, in Numbers chapter 4, verses 5 and 6, join with me in Numbers chapter 4, verses 5 and 6. In this passage, the author is describing the conditions for packing up and moving the components of the tabernacle, the tent that represents God's presence with his people. How do you pack up the tent that represents God? There are specific instructions for it, and here in Numbers 4, verses 5 and 6, when the camp is to move, Aaron and his sons are to go in and take down the shielding curtain and put it over the Ark of the Covenant law. Then they are to cover the curtain with a durable leather, spread a cloth of solid blue over that, and put the poles in place. The Ark of the Covenant is the center of the tabernacle, the piece of the tabernacle that represents God's presence. And when that is going to be moved, gets a cloth, a curtain, and a piece of leather, and then another blue cloth covering it. And in fact, in the rest of the passage, you will see that a blue cloth covers all of the components of the tabernacle to wrap them up in preparation for moving. And so blue takes on a significance, a meaning related to God's presence. Blue, then, in Christian art, traditionally, has come to represent divinity. In traditional Christian art and icons, this is why Jesus wears blue. He also wears red. In this same tradition, red represents humanity and blue represents divinity. So Jesus wears blue over red. Maybe you're familiar with this image or images like this one, where we see Jesus wearing a blue robe over a red robe. That is, Jesus is essentially divine, that's blue, but also has a human nature beneath that's red. And so I asked you all to wear blue. It's a symbol of that divinity. I'm wearing Jesus' colors today, blue over red, although I also put a blue t-shirt, so I also am wearing red over blue. That is, in this same tradition of icons and art, the apostles wear red over blue. That is, they are essentially human, but also have the divine spirit in them. So this is true in Western art, like this depiction, but also true in Eastern iconography, like this one, where we have Jesus again wearing blue over red, his divinity over his humanity. That same tradition is used by artists for centuries and still today. So when you look at Christian art and iconography, you can pay attention to the way that the colors red and blue are used. Here's an example. In this painting, which I just took this photo recently, Jesus is carrying the cross and he is wearing only red. The artist here is emphasizing the humanity of Jesus. Jesus is about to be crucified here, and it isn't his divinity that will die. So the artist has depicted Jesus in just red. Or this one. This is Guercino, a famous Italian painter. This is a really beautiful depiction of Thomas putting his hand into Jesus' side shortly after the resurrection. And notice the way that the artist has used red and blue. Thomas, in his doubt, is depicted as wearing red, human. But Jesus, the recently resurrected Jesus, here wearing just blue, as the author is emphasizing, the painter is emphasizing his divinity. This is God. Here's one more image. Mary, in traditional Christian art, wears blue often, as she's wearing in this one. And it's not because she is divine, but it goes back to that description of the cloth that covers the Ark of the Covenant. That is, when you need to cover the presence of God, you use a blue cloth to do it. Mary is like that cloth. Mary, pregnant with Jesus, covering, containing the presence of God within her. And so, as if Mary is that blue cloth that covers the presence of God, the Ark of the Covenant, Mary in traditional Christian art is often depicted wearing blue. This is an illustration by a man called Christopher Powers. He's a Protestant artist, a brilliant artist who does illustrations of Bible passages. You can find his YouTube channel called Full of Eyes, all one word, Full of Eyes. Some brilliant illustrations of passages in the Bible. This one is a description of Revelation chapter 12, which is the passage I want to look at today. Revelation chapter 12 is a Christmas story. In fact, it's the Christmas story in the language and symbols of the book of Revelation. For years, I was mostly avoiding Revelation, even as a preacher, because it seemed difficult to penetrate, but also somehow controversial and sensitive and causes arguments. I got over that after a couple of years of studying Revelation and came to really love the book. Let this be an advertisement for my upcoming small group. We're going to do the book of Revelation in this next round of small groups. Revelation is a book that was written to a group of churches in what is now Western Turkey at a time when those Christians were experiencing intense persecution at the hands of the Roman Empire. John had been kicked out of Turkey, exiled to the island of Patmos, and so as an exile from Turkey living on an island off the shore, he and I have that in common, and I related to John's experience. John wrote this letter to the believers in Western Turkey to encourage them during this season of persecution. And he does it using a particular genre of literature, a particular style of writing called apocalyptic literature. It's a style of writing that was familiar to the audience at the time. It was a Jewish style of writing that uses symbols to describe the ultimate meaning of events from God's perspective. That's what apocalyptic literature is, and so that's what Revelation does. The book of Revelation is not a book of secret codes to try to crack to figure out when Jesus is coming back or something like that. The book of Revelation is a book of symbols intended to encourage the believers experiencing persecution in the first century, to exhort them, to inspire them to live well, even during difficult circumstances, and we take that same kind of encouragement and inspiration from the book and from the symbols that are in it. Let's take a look at Revelation 12, and see this story, this Christmas story, at work through the symbols that John uses in this apocalyptic style. Revelation chapter 12. A great sign appeared in heaven. A woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and a crown of 12 stars on her head. She was pregnant and cried out in pain as she was about to give birth. So back to that image of the woman here. Here she is with a crown of stars. This woman clearly represents Mary, this woman pregnant, crying out in pain, about to give birth. But as is often the case in the book of Revelation, the symbols carry more than one meaning. Mary also here represents the people of God, both the Old and New Testament people of God. That's what the symbol, the number 12, symbolizes in the book of Revelation. And by the time we get to chapter 12, we've seen that symbol many times. There were 12 tribes of Israel. There are 12 apostles. The number 12 represents the people of God. That's us, the church. Mary represents the people of God. And here, notice that the author describes Mary as standing in such a way that her feet are above the sky. This Mary containing Christ seated in the heavens, this people of God seated in the heavens, back to that imagery in Exodus where the floor is the sky. This is the imagery that the author is beginning to develop here. Verse 3 and 4. Then another sign appeared in heaven, an enormous red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 crowns on its heads. Its tail swept a third of the stars out of the sky and flung them to the earth. The dragon stood in front of the woman who was about to give birth, so that it might devour her child the moment he was born. The dragon here clearly represents Satan. In fact, in a few verses, the author is going to tell us that that's what the dragon represents. But the dragon also represents more than that. The way that the author has described the dragon with 7 heads and 10 crowns, or 10 horns rather, this is a symbol of the Roman Empire. Rome, a city of 7 hills, and the Roman Empire had appointed 10 sub-governors, puppets of the empire, to rule in the region of Israel. The author here is describing the government as a beast. It's subversive. It's politically subversive, describing the empire that is oppressing Christians as Satan. That's what John is doing in this symbolic language. Quite a bold thing for John to do, since he was a prisoner of Rome, sending these letters from his prison cell in Patmos to the churches over the Aegean in Western Turkey. Verses 5 and 6. She gave birth to a son, a male child, who will rule all the nations with an iron scepter. And her child was snatched up to God and to his throne. The woman fled into the wilderness to a place prepared for her by God, where she might be taken care of for 1,260 days. And here we are given more evidence that Mary is represented here, that this is not just the people of God in general, but Mary, who is giving birth to Christ. This note that he will rule the nations with an iron scepter comes from Psalm chapter 2, verse 9. It's a messianic prophecy. It's a prophecy in the book of Psalms about the Messiah who is to come. And the author of Revelation here says that this woman who is pregnant gives birth to the Messiah. So, Jesus is born here, who will rule the nations. Her child is snatched up to God, that is Jesus. The woman flees into the wilderness, where she is taken care of for 1,260 days. The author of Revelation often uses numbers as symbols. 1,260 is 42 months, or 3.5 years. In the book of Revelation, the number 7 represents completeness or ongoingness, or sometimes eternity. And the number 3.5 represents the opposite, something temporary, something short, or even about to finish. So this woman's suffering or fleeing in the wilderness is, the author says, a temporary reality. And so, in the next verses, we see the battle. We have the hero, the woman and her child. We have the enemy, this dragon. Verse 7, then war broke out in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought back. But he was not strong enough, and they lost their place in heaven. The great dragon was hurled down, that ancient serpent called the devil or Satan, who leads the whole world astray. He was hurled to the earth, and his angels with him. Satan loses the battle. This is a peek behind the veil of heaven into the battle happening at that realm. The battle between Satan and God and his forces. Satan loses. He is hurled down. The next verses tell us how God does the conquering. Often in the book of Revelation, we will see a contrast between what the author sees, and he describes for us his vision, and then what the author hears, sometimes in explanation, giving new insight into what he saw. Sometimes it's the other way around. He hears something, and then he'll say, and then I turn and I saw, and there's something unexpected, a new dimension. That's what happens here as well. And so, then I heard a loud voice in heaven say, now have come the salvation and the power and the kingdom of our God and the authority of his Messiah. For the accuser of our brothers and sisters, who accuses them before our God day and night, has been hurled down. They triumphed over him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony. They did not love their lives so much as to shrink from death. God is victorious. The dragon is thrown down. How does that victory happen? It happens by the blood of the Lamb. So the story so far just has this woman pregnant, recently giving birth, swept away to the wilderness. But the celebration already starts looking forward to the death of Jesus. That's how Christ conquers. The message of the book of Revelation is that God does not destroy his enemies by violently crushing them. God wins by dying. He does not violently crush his enemies. He dies for them. And that's how the Lamb conquers. They conquer by the blood of the Lamb. The author is inviting us to live that way. To live in the way that surrenders and sacrifices as the road to victory. That does not give up proclaiming the truth, the victory of Jesus, even at the cost of your life. That's a powerful message in the midst of an empire that is literally killing Christians. Therefore, rejoice, you heavens, and you who dwell in them. But woe to the earth and the sea, because the devil has gone down to you. He is filled with fury, because he knows that his time is short. There is a distinction here between what's happening in the heavens and what's happening on the earth. The victory of God over Satan has already been accomplished in the heavens. And the author says, but Satan is still roaming angrily, enraged, in fury on the earth. And that is the world that we know. A world in which Christ is king, and Satan still roams. The victory of God over Satan has been accomplished, and it is still working itself out in the world. God has won, and it will work itself out in the world. In the meantime, we live in a world in which the victory in heaven is still working itself out on earth. And the author gives us a hint of why is it that evil seems so intense. Satan's time on earth is short. He knows that it is short, and so he's angry. In the next verse, we see more of the picture now on earth. When the dragon saw that he had been hurled to the earth, he pursued the woman who had given birth to the male child. The woman was given the 2 wings of a great eagle, so that she might fly to the place prepared for her in the wilderness, where she would be taken care of for a time, times, and half a time out of the serpent's reach. Let's tackle right away that difficult phrase, time, times, and half a time. In languages of Semitic languages like Hebrew, there are single words, ways of saying two of a thing. And that's the kind of device employed here to say times in Greek. So time, 1, times 2, and half a time. That is 3.5 times. 3.5. That number, again, that symbolizes something that is temporary. In fact, it's describing the same thing. We had seen the picture from the perspective of the battle in heaven and are now being given a hint of, a picture of what's going on from the perspective of the earth. And the woman, she is brought to a place prepared for her in the wilderness where she's taken care of, out of the serpent's reach. And here is the truth for us as the people of God whom this woman represents, we are now as if in a season of exile in the wilderness. And that looks back to the exile in the book of Exodus when God's people were brought out of their captivity in Egypt into freedom, but in the wilderness for a time, and yet under God's protection. And we have a hint of that, a parallel of that in the Christmas story as well, as Joseph and Mary and the new baby Jesus are fleeing Herod's persecution, again to Egypt and back. And so it's as if our life now on this earth is a kind of exile in the wilderness, but where we are protected by God and, as the author says here, out of the serpent's reach. We are in the world where the enemy roams, but we are in the world where Christ is king. The victory has already been established, and as the people of God, we are in the most important ways protected and out of the serpent's reach. Then from his mouth the serpent spewed water like a river to overtake the woman and sweep her away with the torrent. But the earth helped the woman by opening its mouth and swallowing the river that the dragon had spewed out of his mouth. This battle that's now raging on earth, the serpent spewing water, trying to overtake, trying to flood, trying to overcome God's people. But notice here, the earth itself conspires on the side of God's people. This is God's good world. We do not live in an evil place. The earth is not evil. It is God's good world. And he is right now redeeming all things, restoring all things, making all things new, so that in the end, even God's creation conspires to defeat the powers of evil in the world. The earth opens up to swallow whatever the enemy is spewing. Then the dragon was enraged at the woman and went off to wage war against the rest of her offspring. That's you. Those who keep God's commands and hold fast their testimony about Jesus. I hope that's you. The message here is that God is with, God is protecting. He's on the side of those who keep God's commands and hold fast their testimony about Jesus. We have a story that holds our lives together, and it is a story worth telling. I want to show you one more image here. This is a modern icon from a Ukrainian artist called Lyuba Yatskiv. She's an artist that I am a fan of. I have several of her pieces and some hanging. And this one is a depiction of Revelation 12. You can see Mary here with the crown of stars, and she is worshiping Jesus. And here, the serpent, seven-headed dragon. The other day, on Friday evening, we went to see the new Avatar movie. 3 hours and 15 minutes. I remember when the first movie came out, there were reports of people being treated for depression because they didn't want to have to live in the world beyond those cinema doors, and The idea of leaving that created world in the film was heartbreaking to them. The gospel is a story big enough to live in. It is a meta-narrative, a story that holds all of the other stories together. It is a story big enough to live in. And a story that is good enough to give your life meaning. It's a true story. The shallowness of our age brings with it the curse of living disjointed lives. Trying to figure out how to balance all of the parts, my work-life balance, or my worship life, or my workout life. Trying to compile a life that has some kind of meaning out of all of these arbitrary parts. But without a meta-narrative, without a story that gives all of those smaller stories meaning, we are destined to shallowness. Boredom is a symptom of this shallowness. The solution to the boredom that comes from shallowness is not to find better ways to entertain yourself. And the church's job should not be to entertain us either. The solution is to be awakened to the beauty, to the wonder that we find ourselves surrounded by, in the midst of, because of this grand story. And that's my prayer for you this morning. May the gospel awaken you to the wonder of the world that we inhabit, with heroes and villains, dragons and lambs of starry crowns and starless skies, of babies born in mangers, tyrants and mortal dangers, with winged women whisked away to the wilderness where a child is hunted night and day by a primordial seven-headed serpent spewing venom and flame, and raged by the promise that protects a baby and sets him on a path to victory through sacrifice and surrender, and seats him in the heavens where we wait to meet him, and in the meantime, worship as warriors wresting truth from the talons of terror by the word of our testimony and the blood of the child lamb who slays the serpent so we can step on its heads and walk again in peace forever in the garden of God, world without end. Amen. This is an appropriate segue to celebrating communion, the Lord's Supper, at this table. When we come to this table, we are remembering, as we do in the season of Advent, that God became man. We are remembering that God became man and lived a perfect life and died a sacrifice on our behalf. We're remembering the way that God accomplishes victory is through sacrifice. It is a memorial. But as we do in Advent, it is not just a remembering of something that happened in the past. It is a looking forward. This table is a participation in a celebration yet to come, when we will be invited to a wedding celebration. The union of heaven and earth, of us to God. A celebration still on its way, and now we celebrate. This is a foretaste of that table. This is what we commemorate at Advent. It's what we commemorate here. With this bread and this wine, this body and this blood, red, which is why red symbolizes humanity. Today, we are invited to this table where Jesus sits. I'll ask you to take a moment to prepare your hearts to take this bread and this wine.